On the pro Trump's going to win side, in terms of data, the early vote continues to be a problem in terms of how much of a lead she has and the underperformance of black voters. And let's see tomorrow where we are in Pennsylvania. But I think the delta of the Democratic lead is going to be much smaller than even Democrats said they needed to win Pennsylvania.
So it's fitting now to take a final look at the polls. The polls are always wrong. We know that. What do the polls really tell us? Well, actually, if you've got a trained eye and you listen to some of the experts out there, yes, there are some people who really know their stuff about these polls, and also specifically who have observed the Donald Trump voter and how they are underrepresented in the polls for the last two election cycles. And more importantly, the experts who are crunching the data that's coming in on early voting. Party affiliation on early voting ballots is a game changer this time around, because for the first time, Republicans have decided to participate in the early voting process. Well, when you put all of those things together, right now, cautiously optimistic for a big night for the Republican ticket. We'll start with Mark Halperin, who analyzed these things this morning in a harrowing live stream from his car.
On the pro Trump's going to win side, in terms of data, the early vote continues to be a problem in terms of how much of a lead she has and the underperformance of black voters. And let's see tomorrow where we are in Pennsylvania. But I think the delta of the Democratic lead is going to be much smaller than even Democrats said they needed to win Pennsylvania. We'll see, but that's something to watch. In addition, the kind of conventional wisdom amongst Democrats is, and they're buoyed by Ann's poll, is she's posing strong Trumpism, and that undecideds that David Plouffe argued last week are breaking her way. I think right now, people ask me all the time what's going to happen. I think right now, I continue to believe that for a while, it's not going to be close. Either the makeup of the electorate is going to be 55% female and she's going to win, or it's not and she's going to lose. And that could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to be different state to state. I think in 6 or 7 of the states, the electorate will be so strongly women, and so women so strongly for her that she'll win, or not. And that'd be my guess right now, that it's going to be one way or the other.
It's going to be one way or the other. That does take a trained eye. That is an expert. Listen, Halperin actually is a pretty good analyst on all of this stuff, and he's not nearly as radically biased and in the tank as most of the people that you'll see out there. And a couple of things that he just said that are critically important in terms of the early vote, most specifically the Black and Latino vote, underperforming, he says. These are numbers that are way below what they're used to seeing in early voting. How does that affect things? Well, it's basically asking Democrats, especially those in the Detroit, Philadelphia, and Madison, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin areas, to behave on election day in a way that they haven't behaved in the past. The way that the Democrats and Kamala Harris can make up the early voting deficits that they've got right now compared to Republicans is if they show up in a much bigger way on election day than they're used to. Will that happen? Well, since they haven't done that the last several election cycles, it's a tall order. And I know a lot of you were thinking, oh, sure, Republican early voting numbers are looking good right now, but doesn't that just cannibalize the strong or day of voting numbers that Republicans always bring forward? You're just, scoring points in the first quarter that you would have scored in the fourth quarter, but the final score will still be the same. Well, it's not that simple, actually. Here's why early voting numbers for Republicans coming in right now are a big deal for Donald Trump and the Republican ticket. There's a couple of factors here. The first is when you vote early, that means the party and the campaign, they don't have to try to track you down. See, they know you're a Republican voter. That's why you're getting all those text messages. You're getting those emails. Make sure you vote. Make sure you vote. Make sure you vote. The second you have voted, they know it because they interface with the voter rolls. And so they don't have to communicate with you anymore. They don't have to text message you. not only is that less annoying for you, not only does it save the party and the campaign money, but it means that they can then use those efforts to go after voters that maybe haven't voted in the past, lower propensity voters. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're a regular voter and they're chasing you down on election day, that's a waste of time and money for them. Okay. If you've already voted, and right now the numbers in these important states show that Republicans are early voting at numbers they've never seen before, ever seen before. That means today and tomorrow, all of those efforts from all those campaign staffers and all of those party people, they can now go after people that maybe haven't voted before or aren't high propensity voters. If they're chasing you down on election day and you're a regular electioneer, that just means that's time and effort and money they aren't spending on people that there are new voters and they're trying to reach. So that's a big deal, number one. Number two, they've done analysis on a lot of these early votes, and only like 10 or 15% of them are people who usually vote on election day. That's huge. That means that all of this increase of voting, of early voting, are from new Republican voters. Gigantic. All right, so that's big, and that's good analysis from Halperin there. But even better is his breakdown. You've heard about this Iowa poll, right? Oh my God, Kamala's in the lead in Iowa. It's one poll. She's in the lead by 3 points. The other polls in Iowa, same day, Emerson came out with a poll that showed Trump winning by 10 points. So, and everyone's like, well, this Selzer, the woman who runs this poll for the Des Moines Register, it's the most important, solid poll that you'll ever see. They're all going nuts about this poll. So Mark Halperin interviewed her yesterday to get to the bottom of the poll. Well, let's take a look at this expert pollster, and you tell me how impressed you are.
Right. Okay. So Noah, are you able to put up that tweet? Maybe it's up and I can't see it because
It's
I'm
up.
on live. It's up. All right. Ann, are you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. Could you just go through and say what you think about those criticisms?
Well, I'm trying. This is in a format that's a little difficult for me to see. What does this D represent and the R represent?
So right there, I'm going to have to just jump in here because I'm told that this woman is the greatest pollster that the state of Iowa has ever seen, that she is an expert of all experts. She's the most solid political pollster in all of Iowa, in the entire Hawkeye state. And her first question to Mark Halperin in analyzing the crosstabs and breakdowns on this poll is, what do the R and the D represent? Now, I'm no expert on Iowa or on polling, but I got to think that most people know what the R and the D represent when they're looking at the crosstabs on the poll. Also, when she said this isn't a format that I'm not used to seeing, what's hard about this format? Overall, D plus 3, R plus 8. Senior women, D plus 35 to D plus R plus 6. Senior men, R plus 2 to R plus 32. This is, by the way, it says right there, Selzer's polls versus the 2020 exits. That's what the difference is. It's not that hard. So you're looking on the left is what the poll shows, and on the right, what the exit polling in 2020 was, okay, for in the last presidential election. So the breakdown for this poll that everyone says is like so groundbreaking and earth-shattering and shows Kamala Harris, the turnout in 2020 was Republican plus 8. This sampling for this poll reflects a turnout of Democrats plus 3. So that's an 11-point swing from Republican to Democrat. That assumes that the electorate in Iowa has changed from plus 8 Republican to plus 3 Democrat. That's ridiculous. It also showed senior women as D plus 6. Now it shows what senior women as D plus 35. They've had a 29-point swing with women over the age of 65. It's ridiculous. But again, most it's concerning is that this expert doesn't know what the D or the R stand for in how this breaks down. That should raise some eyebrows, right? So we'll watch how this conversation unfolds, but already getting some red flags on this poll.
D. So they're saying that, and again, he says read through the Seltzer crosstabs.
Yeah.
So they're saying that they know that this poll shows, and again, it's they say your sample is it's more 3% more Democrats than Republican, whereas the electorate last time was 8%
Oh, I
more
see.
Republican. It says that you have Indies voting Democrat +4, whereas last time they voted for +7, +4. So they're saying if you compare what you have with what happened in 20, according to the exit polls, it's way too big a change across all these groups in a uniform way towards pro-Harris as opposed to Trump.
Yeah. Well, this is the first time I'm seeing this, and so it's sort of against my nature to think I understand everything that this is saying, and I haven't cross-checked these numbers to know how that actually pans out. But I'm going to say that it is clear that senior women are an advantage to Kamala Harris in our poll. Kamala Harris wins by more than 2-1, actually, maybe even more than that among senior women. It's a big, big spread. So I don't know. I mean,
She seems a little lost, doesn't she? The most brilliant woman in American politics, certainly in the Hawkeye state of Iowa. She seems a little confused and a little lost. And I mean, again, this is the data. You can decide whether you believe it or not. It's the only poll that has shown this the entire year in Iowa, and it comes up 4 days before Election Day, and everyone in the media goes nuts about it. This seems like it's pushing a narrative and is kind of interfering with the thought process of the election, number one. But also, number two, she says senior women. Senior women are a big deal. 3-1, 2-1, Kamala's winning. Okay. Think this through for a minute. In 2020, women in Iowa with Joe Biden on the ticket only went for the Democrats by a +3 margin. And this time around, they're going to go, I'm sorry, senior women was a +6 margin with Joe Biden on the ticket. And now this time around with Kamala Harris, they're a +35. Could be real. Certainly could be. But it defies all explanation. All explanation. And, when you don't know exactly how to read this breakdown, when you're the expert, it raises a couple of red flags, doesn't it? Meanwhile, David Axelrod over on CNN expressing some concerns about what he's seeing right now.
Most worried about right now?
Well, look, the watchword of the day is humility here. When you have polls that are this close, and I'm sitting next to one of the great pollsters, and I think she would tell you, when you have polls this close, you're not sure of anything. And it really matters who shows up because these polls are not precise. So what I'm worried about is you're counting on some women who are independent Republican women to come out and vote for Harris. Is that going to materialize? Is the gender gap going to be what you need it to be? Are minority voters going to come out in the numbers of African-American voters in particular? And are you going to get the margins that you want there? So there are a lot of open questions, and they're obviously working it hard right now. There are feet on the street, and they're doing the kind of work that you do in a race like this. But this race is filled with uncertainty today.
Does that seem like someone who's winning? Does that seem like someone who's confident of the results tomorrow? Does that seem like someone who is ready to do a victory lap based on what he's seeing right now? The man's an expert. He ran Barack Obama's campaign. You know who else was part of Barack Obama's campaign? Jim Messina. This 30-second clip of his conversation yesterday with Jen Psaki may be the most revealing you see all day about what's really going on with Democrats and the Kamala Harris campaign as they look at the early data and look at their polls and what they're learning from them. Take a look at this.
Okay, what's their biggest concern right now if you're the Harris team?
Well, look, I think it's a couple things. The early vote numbers are a little scary, and you and I have been texting back and forth. Republicans didn't do what they did last time. Last time Trump said don't early vote, and so they didn't. Republicans do have an advantage in early vote numbers. When the early vote come in, it's going to look a little bit different than 2020, and that's scary.
Okay, what's their big...
All right, let's break this down, shall we? We're going to watch this together because this 30 seconds tells you a ton. Again, Jim Messina is a Democrat. Jim Messina is paid by Democrats. He works on presidential campaigns for Democrats. He is a partisan, okay? He's going to try to deliver as positive a spin as he possibly can for this, because that's the job he's in, especially on Jen Psaki's show on MSNBC. But you have to also understand that for guys like this, their credibility is super important. So when they get this close to the election, if they know that things are going south, they can't just be, singing a happy tune. They can't. Their job is also to have their credibility solid so that they can work on the next campaign, right? Because you want people who are smart and who see danger signs when they're coming up the road, right? Most of the people who worked on Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, that was their last job, okay? Because they didn't see it coming, all right? So understand that Messina, at this point in the crunch time, if there's very real problems right now for Kamala Harris, he's got to say it. Now, he'll still say it as soft-pedaled as possible, but he's got to say it to maintain some level of credibility so he can continue having that credibility going forward. So the question is, what is Harris concerned about?
Okay, what's their biggest concern right now if you're the Harris team?
Well, look, I think it's a couple things. The early vote numbers are a little scary, and you and I have been texting back and forth.
Two things there. First of all, to use the word scary, early voting numbers are scary right now. That's a hell of a word to use. Not concerning, not troublesome, not noteworthy, scary. But also, secondly, you and I have been texting about this back and forth. Psaki was part of the brain trust for Joe Biden's election in 2020. Messina was on that campaign as well. What is this telling you? It's telling you that the higher ups in the old school Biden campaign apparatus, who were not really part of this Kamala Harris team, they're all texting each other. They're all texting each other. They've got a group text going, and they're telling it like it is. And so Messina, it's funny, when you're in the media, you're not supposed to say stuff like this. It drives me nuts if I'm talking to somebody before I go on the air and we're having a conversation, and then we're on the air and I start talking to them and interviewing them. It drives me nuts when they say, well, like we were just talking off the air. It's like, don't talk about what we said. No one gives a crap what we talk about off the air. No one talks about no one, that doesn't matter. Just tell it to me right now like it's news. Messina's not a media pro. So he just revealed to everybody watching that what they're talking about on the air is something they've all been talking about in their text messages. Think about it. You start seeing these early numbers, the early vote numbers, and Messina picks up this phone and texts to the group text of all the Biden people saying, my God, you guys, are you seeing these early vote numbers? We're screwed. It's scary. And what specifically about the early vote numbers, as I sort of alluded to earlier?
Republicans didn't do what they did last time. Last time Trump said don't early vote, and so they didn't. Republicans do have an advantage in early vote numbers when they're.
Did you hear that word? The wording that he's using is so revealing. Republicans have an advantage in early vote numbers right now. Republicans are trouncing Democrats just in terms of past performance and where we are now. And it's not like they're saying, oh, but they won't show up on election day. No, they're still expecting Republicans to outperform on election day as well. The positive news right now is stacking up. I know it is, because there's no reason why he would say this if things were looking good for Kamala Harris. In fact, he'd be doing a victory lap right now. He'd be taking credit for it. That's what DC political professionals do. See, understand something about Washington, D.C. and these people who make a lot of money, and they make a ton of money, but it's only on election cycles, either in the presidential year or in the off year. They need to be able to go to their next very, very wealthy client. Kamala Harris raised $1 billion, right? When you're Jim Messina, you get a nice chunk of money when you work on a campaign like that. So his narrative coming out of this weekend before the election that he can take with him to his next job interview for the big gig is either going to be, yeah, I was a big part of it, and I called it right before the election. I saw all the numbers, and I was one of their advisors, and look at this. I even on Sunday, I was telling you she was going to win. That's one message that you can take with you. And trust me, when there's a winning campaign, everybody takes credit for it. The other very strong message is, listen, I don't know what those guys were doing on Kamala's campaign, but I saw it coming. I raised the red flags. Those guys were losers. They were awful. Here's me on Jen Psaki the Sunday before Election Day, sending up the warnings signs, right? That's what you're seeing right now. That's what you're seeing right now. A little bit more.
Early vote come in, it's going to look a little bit different than 2020, and that's scary.
That's scary. That's the other thing about looking a little different than 2020 that I want to share with you. Remember when Fox News called Arizona, right? We all remember that moment in 2020. When these guys determine when to call a state and why to call a state, they look at a lot of factors. They look at past voting histories in certain counties and certain districts and certain states. They look at the numbers that are in. They're looking at what's still yet to be counted and what's out there that hasn't been counted yet. And they base their predictions and they base their projections on what they know they've got, the way the vote's been going, and then what past performance has been in terms of what still needs to be counted and what they know the breakdown of Republican versus Democrat is. This time around, those models are blown up because of the huge shift in the early Republican ballots that are in and the early Republican votes. That means all those models that they had that allowed them to project, it's going to be very different this time around. Okay. That's why Messina said that right at the end there. Hang on. Listen again. Listen to the words.
Republicans do have an advantage in early vote numbers. When the early vote come in, it's going to look a little bit different than 2020, and that's scary.
Yeah, it's going to look a little different than 2020, and that's scary, which means they used to sort of assume that they had this cushion that they could work off of. They don't have that anymore. And so now as the day of voting starts to get tabulated and things start to skyrocket, the people in the, brain trust that are going to say, well, do we call this state or not? They're going to say, well, look at the patterns, look at the numbers, look at the early votes. That's why it's scary. All right, a little bit more. We've been watching this guy, Harry Enton, on CNN. It's almost like he's doing therapy for the CNN viewers to prepare them for the worst. This morning, it was his last analysis that we're going to see before the election results start coming in. And here's what he had to say to their viewers.
Look, here's the situation. We've been talking about the 7 battleground states, Arizona 3, Georgia 1 for Trump, less than a point in North Carolina, less than a point in Nevada. And then along your Great Lake battleground states, less than a point for Harris in Pennsylvania, less than a point in Wisconsin, less than a point in Michigan. And if, of course, you put it, this is how tight it is. If you put the polls to the electoral map, Kamala Harris carries these Great Lake battleground states despite losing all of the Sunbelt battleground states. I'm coming to John's side of the screen. You get to 270 electoral votes. That is as tight as it can possibly be, Mr. Berman.
All right, let's pause here for a quick minute because we've been talking about this. The Sunbelt states, I don't know why they're calling it that because it's not entirely the Sunbelt, but Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, those are all leaning in Trump's direction right now. Those 3 blue wall states in the Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. If those 4 on the South go Trump's way, she's got to do the clean sweep, and she just barely makes it to 270, which, by the way, makes the decision in Nebraska to not do winner take all, which they could easily have done by a move of the state legislature and the governor. But you see that little blue square in the middle of Nebraska. They proportion their electoral votes now. And so that could give Kamala Harris the presidency by just that 270, exactly what she needs to win the presidency. Although I got to tell you, if this is what happens, you could look out in Nebraska and for some other areas about some members of the Electoral College who might decide to vote their conscience instead of vote on what the state dictates or what the election dictates. That said, those 3, but if Trump wins those 4 in the South, which it looks like right now, you look at those 3, if she loses 1, it's over, absolutely over. And right now, as you saw by the poll he just did, according to his poll, it's less than a percentage point. But understand something, these are polls. And every single time they have polled Donald Trump in a presidential election, he has outperformed those polls by anywhere from 3 to 5 points. So if Kamala Harris is ahead by less than a percentage point in those 3 states right now, based on past performance and based on how the polls just refuse to accurately count Trump voters in this country, you'd be excused, you'd be forgiven to believe that when it says Kamala Harris by less than a percentage point, it really means Trump by about 3 or 4 points. That's sort of where I'm sitting right now when I look at these. And by the way, if that's the case, you might as well bring Virginia and New Hampshire into this map as well, with a bit of a pink hue. But we'll let Ensign continue here.
And if you look it up historically speaking, and I basically took the poll leaders' electoral votes based upon the polls at the end of each campaign, right now 270 in 2024, that is the tightest that the polls have ever been projected on the electoral map, even tighter than 2000 when Al Gore was projected to get 281 electoral votes since 1972. The bottom line is, Mr. Berman, it is historically tight at the end of this campaign.
All right. And the point, though, that you keep making, Harry, and it's such an important point to make here. Everyone says the race is tied, the race is tied. It very well may be. Yeah. But that doesn't mean there's not a possibility, maybe even a big possibility, maybe even a majority possibility that one candidate wins by a lot.
That's exactly right. So, if you were basically to model this out, as a bunch of folks do, will the 2024 winner get 300 plus electoral votes? A majority chance of yes, they will get at least 300 electoral votes, a relative blowout in today's day and age. The minority is at 40% no, that the winner will get less than 300 electoral votes. How the heck is that possible? Well, essentially, if you look back at swing state polling averages since 1972, the average error in the swing states is 3.4 points. And of course, all of the 7 closest battleground states are within 3 points. So if you get an average error and it all goes in one direction, well then, lo and behold, you will in fact get a blowout in the Electoral College of the winner getting at least 300 electoral votes.
All right, what does that look like?
What does that look like? Well, if the margin of error benefits Kamala Harris, you get an average poll miss, it benefits Kamala Harris. Of course, she wins all these Great Lake battleground states, but she also wins down in the Southeast, and she wins in the Southwest as well. She gets up to 319 electoral votes, a huge, big blowout by today's standards. Of course, it could go in the other direction. If the polling error benefits Donald Trump, he actually wins all these Great Lake battleground states. He wins in the Southeast, and of course, he wins in the Southwest, and he gets up to 312 electoral votes. The bottom line is this. I've been coming to you day after day after day with numbers. The only takeaway at this point, it's historically tight, but basically any scenario is on the table.
Because one tilt one way or the other. Trump could do better than he did in 2016.
Correct.
But tilts the other way. Harris could do better than Joe Biden did.
Exactly right.
All right. So buckle up.
Buckle up, put the seatbelt on. We're going to be in this ride, perhaps for a while, but maybe not.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, I'll give you my prediction coming up in a bit. Although, I don't know, should I might hold my prediction till tomorrow night. But let's switch to Steve Karnecki really fast, because he did another roundup at Meet the Press yesterday. These are the two big board operators that with their touch screens, and this is all they do. And they're going to be very, very big tomorrow night as the results come in, crunching up these numbers. Karnecki was the first guy on MSNBC in 2016 who actually raised the flag and said that, I remember it was Chris Matthews, I think, who was covering the early results, saying, based on what we're seeing right now, Trump has a clear path to victory. I'll never forget that moment on MSNBC when it was like, somebody had just drowned a puppy on set. So here's Karnecki breaking down the latest polls here one last time.
Now we get to away from the national poll to the battlegrounds. This is our running average. We've been keeping this the entire summer and fall of the quality polls in all of the battleground states. And a couple things jump out here. Well, obviously, they're all close. You don't see a margin here of greater than 1.9 points. You do see a bit of a north-south divide. We've seen this lately in the polling. Trump's leads here, very small, but Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, basically Sun Belt states. Harris's best performance is in here. Wisconsin, 1.4, 1.8 in Michigan. These are the northern tier states. 0.3 of a point in Pennsylvania. So a bit of a north-south divide. And if that holds, if that cements, that is ultimately good news for Harris, because Michigan plus Pennsylvania, plus Wisconsin, if there are no surprises outside of the battleground, would for Harris equal 270 electoral votes. If the action really is limited to the battleground, Donald Trump has to win one of those 3 northern tier battleground states where our averages continue to show Harris with slight leads in those states. But then that gets to the question. If there are no surprises, outside of the core 7 battleground states that we have talked over and over about. And that is what the Des Moines Register poll really gets to. It's the question of what is happening in Iowa itself, because obviously you talked to Ann Selzer right there. One of the questions is, does this spill over to other states? Does this reflect something, if this is what's happening in Iowa, that might be happening in other states, maybe states we haven't been talking about, maybe some of the other battleground states? So a couple ways to look at this. One, obviously, I think you were talking about this, but the issue of abortion exceptionally potent in Iowa because that 6-week ban went into effect this summer. Millions of dollars in spending there, not in the presidential race, but congressional races where abortion has been a driving issue. Is this more of a state-specific effect that's limited more to Iowa, if this is what is happening in Iowa?
Yeah, they're making the case that it's all about abortion, and that explains the Iowa polls. The Iowa poll is absolutely wrong. I'm sorry. And this is just happy talk for the NBC audience, for the MSNBC audience. That's what this really is. They're trying to keep spirits high because, well, they're not in the news business. They're in propaganda business. It's not going to be, Iowa's not going to Kamala Harris. I'm sorry. I don't like making predictions in general, but I'm pretty confident in that one. Real fast. Here's the final Real Clear Politics map. This is where things stand as of now, based on the last round of battleground polls. And that actually gives a slight lead in Michigan and Wisconsin to Kamala Harris, and a slight lead in Pennsylvania to Donald Trump, which means Trump wins. This is the final, and we've been relying on Real Clear Politics' average the entire year when we look at these numbers. Based on the final round of battleground polls, this is exactly what the map looks like. And understand those 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which is where all of the candidates are spending all of their final time today, tonight. Donald Trump's final stop, as he has in both 2016 and 2020, will be Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's scheduled to speak tonight at 10:30. Count on it being closer to midnight. That's what it looks like right now in the battleground states, based on the final polls. But here's the best part about everything that we've been analyzing. Based on the last 2 presidential elections, those polls will be wrong. They will be wrong. And based on past history, they're wrong in one direction. They're wrong to benefit the Democrat. And my instinct is that's exactly what they are right now as well, especially because the early voting numbers have been overwhelmingly shocking for Republicans. That's not picked up in the polls. And also, and I've been saying this for a long time, when you look at Nevada, you look at Pennsylvania, look at Georgia, you look at North Carolina, they have seen a huge increase in registrations, new registrations for people registering as Republicans. They don't show up in the polls because new registrations are not likely voters, and these polls are all of likely voters. That's the hidden number that nobody's counting right now, and that will be the difference as well. I have my prediction right now is, if it's super close, if it's razor thin, if it's as close as they were just saying, Kamala Harris wins. Because if it's close, it's going to stink to high heaven, and they'll find a way. But if it's a blowout, if it's overwhelming, if it's exactly what I'm alluding to, that the polls are wrong and they're miscounting and undercounting Trump voters by 3 to 5 points, Trump wins with over 315 electoral votes. New Hampshire and Virginia also come in. One of 2 things will happen. Trump with a huge victory, a decisive victory, a definitive victory, or Kamala Harris barely ekes it out because if it's close, things happen. The only way we'll know for sure, though, is when we watch the results together tomorrow night. We begin our coverage live right here, 6 p.m. from a huge election night party downtown Washington, D.C. Make sure you join us at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. You know, there's a lot at stake in this upcoming election. Regardless of who's sitting in the White House, the fuse in the economy has already been lit. 4 years of a conservative presidency is probably not going to be enough to turn the tide of our $35 trillion national debt. It's going to take a few conservative presidencies to really make a difference there. And if the left wins this time around, forget about it. It's like throwing gas on an already blazing dumpster fire. You don't have a whole lot of control over the election's outcome. You're probably feeling somewhat frustrated about that. That's all right. Control what you can control. You can diversify your savings right now by investing in gold from Birch Gold. For millennia, gold has stood firm in the face of greedy governments, economic upheavals, and global strife, and it can help protect you right now. Birch Gold will help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold, and it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. In the past 4 years, the buying power of the US dollar has declined while the price of gold has increased by 40%. You think that's a coincidence? Text Larry to 989898 right now. Get your free info kit on gold. Trust Birch Gold to protect your savings. Text Larry to 989898 today.